Hi, Kenneth.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing okay. So
Good.
is it cold enough for you today?
Roads were icy this morning.
I don't drive, so I didn't I don't
Oh, yeah, yeah. The driveway and the road, they were icy. It seems to be better now.
that's good. I haven't looked ahead on the weather to see if we're going to be getting any terrible weather or not.
Well, they're talking about something for Monday.
Great.
I'm not sure if it's snow or rain, but it's like every other day.
I'm ready for spring.
Yes, yes.
I this is that part of winter where I just like, okay, done, ready, ready to get rid of the wool clothes and do the fun.
Sit outside and catch the sun. Yes.
Yeah. So, it'll happen soon enough, but it's just, right now it's just come on, hurry it up. So,
Yeah.
so I bought some new boots.
Ooh, let's see.
Oh, wow.
I
You're
love
great.
those.
You're great.
Pony fur.
Do they have a pony
Very
texture? Yes, it's
Well,
lovely.
it's pony fur. Yeah. I
It's
saw
so
them in
fun.
the window and couldn't resist. So I went in and got them, and now I have them. So, you see, my birthday was on Thursday. So this is my birthday present to myself.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. 63. Jesus.
Many more.
Yeah. Well, so how's everyone doing?
Good.
Pretty good. We have power and water, so that's more than we can say for a lot of people.
I'm hearing about just all of this is happening in Texas, and I feel just terrible for them because I think, oh, for heaven's sakes, this is the 21st century, and people are melting dirty snow and icicles for water.
Everything that you are hearing on the news, it's real. It's unbelievable. Things are really bad here for a lot of people.
Well, it's
and
as
it's shocking.
In Oklahoma too. We Oklahoma had a bunch of water mains break in Tulsa, so big parts of Tulsa don't have running water now.
Oh my God.
So
it's bad. We have a boil order right now, and we have to boil water at least until Monday. But I'm grateful that we have water to boil and we have power to boil it with. It's just everything's relative, and it's bad for a lot of people here.
Yeah. Well,
are you in Texas, Paige?
I am. I'm in Dallas.
Oh, okay. My sister's in Austin.
It's bad in Austin too. A lot of Austin has no water.
Yeah, they're lucky. They still have water and power, and they ended up taking in a family from their church that, has little kids.
Oh.
So,
yeah.
Pandemic or no, you gotta take care of people. So.
Exactly.
I look at this and I just think, okay, how are the hospitals functioning?
They're evacuating them.
Yeah.
So Austin, for example, is evacuating like their patients who need intense care. Like they're sending them to neighboring states.
Wow.
Terrible.
Yeah.
So that's an air evacuation by helicopter. So
it just in 2021, you just think, wow.
Yes.
My sister lives in Oklahoma, and I was talking to her yesterday, and what she's running into in Oklahoma, she said it could be a clear day, no wind, all of a sudden her power will go out. And they had an ice storm. It was a month or so ago, and she was without power for 9 days. So what she has done is she's not wealthy, but she just decided I can't go without power for 9 days. So she has bought a generator, paying the electrician to put the generator, hook it up to her power in her house, and they're hooking up a natural gas line so that it will fuel the generator. And she had to get a shed to house the generator in. And I just think it's 2021. How is this happening? But there are lots of different answers on that. But,
Yes.
it just makes me shake my head and think, wow, it's we're living in strange times. That is.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so it looks like we're missing one person, but we can get going. So I guess my first question is, because some of the people have done their office hour, other people have not, and so I guess I'm just going to check in. So where is everybody today? You know, are there any questions or anything you need of me so far?
I haven't done my office hour yet, but I don't feel like I need it yet.
Okay, fair enough.
So
You
I'm
know,
hanging on to it.
yeah. So yeah, you just, you don't have to do it at a certain time. I just want you to know that it's there when you need it.
Oh, I'm going to need it.
Okay. Now I have a question for Julie. Julie, what happened?
I was going, crossing the crosswalk with the light and a car swung around. Got within 2 feet of me before the guy saw me. He hit the brake. I instinctively put my hands on the hood of the car and the car kept rolling forward and threw me backwards on my wrist.
Oh,
Oh my
Ooh,
goodness.
Oh,
So now I have a fractured wrist, so I'm just going to be here taking notes and I'm going to have to do my sewing later, unfortunately.
man. Oh,
Are you right-handed?
I'm left-handed, fortunately.
Oh,
oh,
goodness.
well that,
Ooh, that's a relief.
Relief.
I'm glad you weren't hurt more.
Thank you.
I'm
Yeah,
glad you're okay.
Yeah, you're really, yeah,
Yeah.
it's frustrating to have a broken wrist, but thank goodness that's all that happened to you.
exactly. Yeah. And so I'm trying to keep my chin up and hoping for the best, but I'm happy to be here. This is diverting. So I like
wow.
it.
Oy. Well, we hope you get well very quickly.
yes, yes.
So okay.
Yes.
So today, kind of where we're going to go is I'm going to start with marking, because there's some marking that I like to have us do. And then, so how I construct this, because Maureen was asking during her office hour, basically, will you tell us how to put this together? Absolutely. I'm going to be, each week there's going to be an installment. And so today's installment is going to be a cuff latch and also bound buttonholes, because I'm kind of running all of these techniques in the order you would need them to make the coat. So bound buttonholes go in fairly early in the process. A lot of people, when you're putting in worked buttonholes, that's kind of at the end, but the bound buttonholes are a little bit, to a certain extent, more towards the beginning. So that's the deep dive video that I'm going to be doing today. So any questions before I begin the videos? Okay, so we shall begin. Latch. Aha. Hurry up. Okay, so I'll close that up.
From muslin and tailoring canvas, and we've saved out the welt guide with the tailoring canvas. So we have all of our pieces cut, ready for marking.
And as I said last time, don't be shy. If you have a question, call it out. I can stop the video and address the question right when you have the question. So don't be shy on that.
Now that we have everything cut out, aside from marking clips on the notches, there are a couple things that I want to mark. Pocket placement and also center front and the button placement. Now, a little note here. What I've done, I've worked ahead, and since I altered this here, I needed to redistribute the spacing for the buttons. So that's what I would say is don't forget to do that. You could actually just wait until you have the buttonholes made, but it's just good to look at it in the pattern. I like everything back to the pattern as best I can. So the first thing I want to do is make tailor tacks. Now, some people sew through the paper. I don't encourage that. So what you can see here, I poked, or punched actually, holes. And I used the eyelet punch from my buttonhole chisel. So I have a nice round hole. And I'm going to show you how I like to mark tailor tacks, which is maybe the same as you do it, maybe a little different, but I'd like to cover it here. This one at the edge because it's just a little easier to access for the video. What I want to do, I'm using, it's a Gutermann thread, Gutermann, Mara 30. I like that because it has a little bit of heft to it. You can use really whatever basting thread you choose. I like a double strand. So then I'm going to stitch down and then up right next to it. And then a little spacer. I find this makes it a little easier to make the loops consistent. You stitch in, you bring the needle back out. Notice we're not going through the paper, we're just going through the little hole. It's a little easier if I'm not looking through the camera. Again, stitch back in. Show you how this works. That out. And see, the nice thing is you can get this, you don't have to worry about tearing up your pattern. And ultimately, when you separate the fabric later, come in here, threads, there you have your tailor tacks. So now I will work ahead and mark all of the buttonholes and matching notches for the welt pocket and bring it back here because next we want to mark the center front line. All of the tailor tacks in. The next thing that we want to do, now some people stitch through the paper. I'm not going to do that. This is a fairly easy thing to do. Fold the paper on the center front. Then I'm going to show you, it's a variation of thread tracing. So with the thread tracing, we're going to be using the same Mara 30. I'm going to start a little above this buttonhole here. And the easiest way to remember it is you stitch twice. You leave a loop. As we go along the cut edge of the paper, we make a stitch that lays flat. And a loop. Next, flat. There's a different way I'll show you in a moment, but this is essentially what we're doing. One stitch is flat, one stitch creates the loop. Flat, and the loop. So this is what it looks like. You have flat loop, flat loop, flat loop. Now, there's Another way, if you're feeling very frisky and adventurous, you can get 2 stitches in one pass. So this has a loop here, flat. So now, thread is flat. This, watch very carefully. Take 1 stitch and another stitch. So having a long needle is going to be helpful. And then you leave the loop. So you have a loop and a flat all in one. So again, 1 stitch, another stitch. So it creates the same thing. So you can choose to do it the first way, which is a loop and a flat stitch, which is a little easier to remember. Or you could do it, you have your flat stitch here, 1 stitch which is going to create the loop, and the next stitch which is going to create the flat stitch. 2 different ways of making the thread tracing. Now, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see. Here you have a loop and a flat stitch. I will continue off camera and finish the rest of this and bring it back to show you the results. So here we are. We have all of the thread tracing sewn. Now I'm going to show you how this works. It's kind of like magic. Pry the fabric apart and cut down the center. Now, this is a little memory trick if you're working on a fabric that the front and the back side look the same. I have this fuse so you can tell back and front, but some fabrics it's a little bit unclear. How I remember this, the face has the whiskers. So if you have a fabric where you can't tell front from back, you look for the whiskers. On the back, it's going to look like this on one side, it will look like this on the other side, but there's no whiskers. And that's how I remember the face has the whiskers. I will go and open the rest of this and bring it back and show you the result. So we have all of our marking done. And when I put the pockets in, I will open up tailor tacks on the pocket. So we have our cutting. We have our marking done. Now we get to start construction. But before we start construction, I would like to recap marking. On the lining, aside from making the snips for the matching notches in the seam allowances, really the only marking we want to do is the shoulder dart on the sleeve. On the main garment, you want to have tailor tacks for the buttonholes, tailor tacks for the pocket placement, and thread tracing for the center fronts. Make sure not to stint on marking. It will make your life so much easier later. So now, let's start making this coat.
Okay, so questions.
Do you have a favorite needle? Sorry.
What was that?
Go ahead.
What do you have a favorite needle for your markings?
You know, I like milliner's needles. Milliner's needles, as a rule, are longer than other, you know, like regular hand sewing needles. So you can get more stitches on a pass. This particular one, it's a milliner's needle. I want to say it's I think it's a number 11. It's a fairly large one because the Mara 30 is a fairly thick thread. But as a rule, milliner's needles for marking and also for hand sewing. I tend to use them for everything.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So other questions?
I had a quick question again. Kenneth, if I'm using an 1.25 button,
Yes.
my center front needs to be how far from the edge?
Okay, the general rule is that your overlap is the button diameter plus 1/8 of an inch. So the stitching line for an 1.25 button needs to be 1 3/8 of an inch outside the center front line. So
Thank
you might have to move your center, move your seam line and your seam allowance to
Okay.
accommodate that.
Thank you.
And also kind of the general rule is the length of the buttonhole is the button diameter plus 1/8 of an inch. So the length of the buttonhole equals the width of the overlap. They both the same formula.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Actually, two questions. One is, what was that tool that you used to mark? You said you were using the blunt end of something?
Oh no, it is. Oh, you mean the hole punch?
Yes.
Well, actually, I'll show it to you. I have it right here. This, of course, it has a beautiful sterling handle because I can. This is the eyelet punch from my buttonhole chisel kit.
Okay.
You know, if you buy the buttonhole chisel, they have the little chisel, they have the little cutting mat, and they have the little eyelet punch. I just
Okay.
put a different handle on it, but that's what this is.
Okay.
Okay.
And then the second question, which it looked like your tailor tacks for your buttonholes were just slightly in from the center front line.
Yeah, I just did that so I wouldn't run into it when I was doing the tailor basting. Or the
Okay,
tailor
so
yeah,
there's no magic as to how far in that you were just trying to get it off of the center front line.
right. Now, when in a pattern, kind of what's considered the correct buttonhole placement in relation to center front is it's considered good placement to have the buttonhole extend 1/8 of an inch into the overlap. So the end of the buttonhole is not at the center front. It comes in just 1/8 of an inch. And that is because if you think about it for a moment, you know, like when you sew the buttonhole, when you sew the button with the shank, you lose about 1/8 of an inch. So to make sure that, you know, when you sew the buttonhole, when you put the button on, you button everything up, the two center fronts then will hit dead on. That's the general rule on that.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So other questions? Okay. So now, you know, now you know how to mark. I don't know how many of you have seen this particular thread tracing, but this is something my students at FIT loved because, you know, the whole thing about the face has the whiskers, because a lot of times I tell them to get a tweed fabric and it's hard to tell the front from the back. And sometimes I even get a little bit confused. And so I always have to repeat to myself, the face has the whiskers, the face has the whiskers. So, you know, these are little things to help you memorize these things. Okay. So our next the next video is going to be making the cuff latch, because, you know, I'm going to build the cuff latch. We're going to do the buttonholes. Next week, we're making the collar. The following 2 weeks, oh, which reminds me, next week, I need to start at 12:30 instead of 12. And you know, I'll send this in an email as well. I have something else that kind of butted up against this. So I figured, you know, it ends at 12. So if we start at 12:30, then we'll all be good. So yeah, you know, I'm showing you the different parts and pieces. And so this week, the easy one, the cuff latch, and then how to make the bound buttonholes. This is one of my methods. So that's kind of where we're going next. So let us continue. Marking, cuff latch, here we are. Oh, wrong, sorry. Oops. Bound up. Ah, here we are.
So here we have the pattern for the cuff latch, and we have the lining and the face fabric cut. The lining I cut on the bias, And the face fabric I actually cut on the cross grain so that the texture would match with the texture of the sleeves on the coat. So this is the pattern. These are the pieces. Now, let's get busy. Since we cut both pieces out of the same pattern piece, we want to actually shave 1/8 of an inch off of each edge on the lining so that the seams will favor to the inside. So what that looks like here is shave much off, not a lot. And do try to work with a sharp rotary cutter. So 1/8 of an inch off each edge will be just fine. So next, we want to pin these two right sides together. You can see that I've pinned one side first, and I like pin basting rather than pinning perpendicular. I find you get more control. So the easy way to get these two edges to match is just to fold this over, and you can see when you fold it over, the edges automatically match. So again, pin based all along. So there we are. And then we can come back here and match that corner. And then you're just going to ease the face fabric slightly onto the lining. When you're favoring, that is what you do. I like having the lining, which is going to be the smaller of the pieces, together. I like the lining pinned on the top, because that way the feed dogs on the machine will do the work. Now, before I go over to the machine, what I have done, since we're using 1/2 inch seam allowances, I marked there. I want to know that intersection, because there's a little trick I'm going to show you when we get over to the machine so that we can actually turn that corner and pull it tightly when we turn it right side out. Now, this is a little trick that I use to turn my corners. I'm using white thread because it's a little easier to see, but normally I would use something that matches. This is buttonhole thread, or Mara 30. And so what I want to do here is I want to make a little tiny loop right at that corner. And so when I pull the stitch, what I will eventually do then is thread this into the needle. So you have both ends of the thread going through the needle. So it's going to create a loop. Especially challenging when you're doing it through a camera. Okay, so here we have the thread. And on the back, you just see a little tiny stitch. And like I said, if it were in the same color as what you're sewing on, you really wouldn't notice it. So then I like to come in here and bury that right there. And you tunnel it between the layers and have it emerge somewhere out here. So this then point there, it kind of ties that off so that when we sew, and I'm going to show this running through the machine, we will sew right up to there with short stitches, one across, and then sew back this way. When we turn it right side out, we'll use this to pull this corner tight. So now, let's put this under the machine and sew. Seam allowances are 1/2 inch. Stitch length is your standard 2.5. As we work up to the corner here, I like to shorten the stitch to 0.5 to 0.75. You want a very short stitch as you're going around corners. Yep. Oh, there we go. Good. Okay. Lengthen it again. I generally shorten and lengthen about 1/4 inch from where we turn. Okay, so now this is where get a better look at this. So this stitch length is 0.5, 0.75. Turn. Stitch one, and then about 1/4 inch or so, and then lengthen the stitch back to your standard 2.5. Now, one of the things I'm going to show you, as we're sewing the second side, see how I fold that? That's going to, it'll sort of reinforce the favoring. Show you the result. Extremely short stitches there and here. An extremely short stitch at these corners makes it so that you can trim close and you can turn it, and you don't have to worry so much about the fabric bursting at the corners. Next, the pressing table. Before we trim, it's a good idea to press everything as sewn. And this may seem counterintuitive, but since I want to press these seam allowances open, it really is easier to press the seam allowances open before you trim these corners. So what that's going to look like, this is where you want your point presser. And you have to press this in sections. So there we are. See, it is easier to manage when you have an entire seam allowance. And you just open it up and press it a little at a time. And we turn it over, press the other side. And you can see here, far easier to press it open before you trim all those seam allowances. Okay, so we have now both seam allowances pressed. That out of the way. This is where we trim. So here, so you can get within about 1 millimeter of that stitching. See, this is where some people get a little shy, but that's why you have short stitches there, so you can trim quite close in there. So then again, start a steep angle here and a steep angle here. But you want to remove as much bulk as you can get out of there. So there you have a little extra trim there. There. There's one. Now let me trim the other. This doesn't, you don't have to trim quite so much because it's a flat angle. There. So next, I will turn this right side out. When you're starting to turn this right side out, this point, you just want to start it with the point turner just to get it going. And then you can use the heel end of the point turner to push everything through. And what I'd say is don't let it bunch up too much here. It might mar your fabric. So once you can get a hold of it here, then you can turn it right side out. So now, this angle here, I'm just going to slip the point turner back in and make that a nice point. And then here, before you use your thread, you want to turn it as much as you can before you rely on the thread. But then this is where, okay, sorry about that. This is where the thread comes in. You can see here it is. Now, what you're just going to do is gently, gently give it a pull. And it may break, it may not, but there you have it. A nice, crisp edge. Let me give this a press, and I'll show you the results. I like to press it from the back, and now you can see how the seams are favoring towards the lining. Now, notice that little corner here. Not as crisp as I would like, so I'm going to show you another little trick for making it press more crisply. Again, with your buttonhole thread, you use this, then I'm going to press this without the pressing cloth so you can see what I'm doing here. So, both ends, and you pull. And there you go. I might even do it on this one too, just to reinforce that. So, sorry. So there you go. You have nice, crisp corners. Now, let's go back to the work table. And here we have the cuff latches. Now I'm planning on a top stitch, but I'm going to cover the top stitching later, so I will set these aside. We're finished with the cuff latches.
So questions? Observations, comments?
Kenneth, did you cut off an eighth of an inch all around that lining piece, or just the long?
Just on the long edges.
Okay.
The short end seems to take care of itself, but the long edges you need to.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, other questions? Thoughts? Yes, Maureen. You might turn on your microphone, please.
Okay.
There you go.
I noticed on one corner only, you did like 2 angle stitches.
Yeah.
But on the other corner, you didn't do that.
Well,
What did you?
Well, what I do on a really acute angle is I like a couple of stitches across, but that was a more obtuse angle. So
Okay.
I don't feel like it needs that on the obtuse angles.
Gotcha.
Okay. So,
Thank you.
I have a question, Kenneth.
Yeah.
So your fabric is block fused, but if you're not working with block fused fabric, would you recommend a little extra interfacing behind that
it certainly couldn't hurt.
fabric? Okay.
Yeah. You know, even just like a little bit of like fusible Pellon.
Yeah.
You know, see, normally I'm not a big fan of fusible as a rule, but there are certain times when it really saves the day. And I think having it behind at least the end of that will give you a little more security when you're stitching and trimming and turning those corners.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes. So other questions? Okay, so the next in our videos is going to be the bound buttonhole. There are different ways of making the bound buttonhole. This is what I call a ribbon buttonhole, and you'll see in the video kind of why I call it that. This will give you a 1/2 inch finished height buttonhole. So it would be something you would use for something a little more substantial button. But what I have found is I do a double welt pocket with this same method, and it is really like falling off a log. When you kind of when you understand how it all works, I never sweat double welt pockets or buttonholes. So I figure, at this point, because you're going to need the buttonholes, you have the button placement marked on your coat. We've assembled the cuff latch. This is when the buttonholes would go in, is pretty much in the beginning. And so you see, the beauty of this is with, I shouldn't be saying this, but like, if you're committing to buttonholes, if you really, mess up one front, this is where you get rid of the front and you make another front. So not saying that any of you are going to do that, but you see, this is why I was talking to someone this week, and my thing is I buy 5 yards. And people look at me and they say, why do you buy 5 yards? Because then I don't have to sweat it. If I have to recut something, I'm okay. Now I'm going to tell a little story on myself. I had a client who called me from the Fortuny showroom in Venice. And yes, and lovely gal, voice like a rusty hinge. She called me, and she said, Kenneth, this is Jean. I'm at the Fortuny showroom in Venice. How much do I need for a jacket? She wanted me to make her dinner jacket out of Fortuny fabric. And I said, 5 meters, Jean. And this was a two print, so it was like $700 a meter. And then she said, how much do you need for a pair of jeans? I said, another 2 meters would be fine. And so, about a week or so later, a package arrived with 7 meters of this fabric. So yes, I giggled like a little girl when I opened it. So yes, we made her the jacket. I got my pair of jeans, and then I was able to make my husband a pair of board shorts for our trip to Palm Springs. So it's always good to buy 5 yards or 5 meters. That's just the magic number. Okay, so buttonhole. Let's see if this is the one. Oh, wrong one. Sorry. And again, don't be shy about asking questions during the video.
The double welt pocket and the bound buttonhole strike fear into a lot of people. I used to be one of them until I figured out this particular technique. What we have here is a 1/2 inch opening.
Now, I won't be going into making the pocket for this particular one. It's just going to be the buttonhole, so don't despair.
This is our double welt pocket. As you can see, it has what's called a facing, and then there's the pocket bag. And from here, looking down, we have the bound buttonhole and how it finishes to a facing. So these, I know, look a little scary and intimidating, and I was where you are now. So we are going to learn how to make the double welt pocket and the bound buttonhole. Got a lot of work to do, so let's get busy. Before I continue, I thought it's good to show you where we're going with this so you can see what we're doing. We are creating what I call the welt unit. These two folded edges will eventually meet in the final pocket. This is the front with 1 row of stitching. This is the back with 3 rows of stitching. This will become important later. But right now, let's make the welt units. To begin, we want a woven edge ribbon. Now, how you can tell a woven edge ribbon is it looks like it has a little selvage on each edge. There is another ribbon called Petersham. It does not look like this. You want the ribbon to look like this. Now, the size. Size is very important. As you can see here, 7/8 inch, 22 millimeter. This is white polyester grosgrain ribbon. You can use any color. I'm choosing to use white so that we can see what we're doing here. But this particular ribbon for this particular operation is essential, except no substitutes. Because ultimately, we're going to be making a 1/2 inch wide finished opening. So what we're seeing here, I have cut a strip of the fabric 3 times wider than the ribbon. So roughly 3 inches. You can go a little over. Doesn't really matter. You can trim it away later. So now this, we're going to lay this down onto the reverse of the fabric. Wrong side of the fabric facing up. So it doesn't hurt to just come in here and pin a few pieces in place. So we're pinning this in place. So next, we will go to the sewing machine. Here, we will edge stitch this ribbon to the fabric. About 1/8 of an inch in. Once we've sewn one side, we go back to the beginning and sew the opposite side. You don't want to sew down one way and up the other way because you're going to get a twist. Direction is going to make it so that everything lies flat. Done. Let me pull out a little bit, show you where we're at. So here we have the ribbon sewn to the reverse of the fabric. Turn it over, you will see these stitches. Ultimately, these stitches will end up on the inside. You won't see these in the final product. Next, we go to the pressing table. First,
Kenneth, can I ask a quick question?
that's
Sure.
sewn.
Yeah, hang on one moment. Yes, question.
Did you cut the fashion fabric on the cross grain for that?
You could cut it on the cross grain or the lengthwise grain.
Okay, either way.
You know, and you know, and there have been times if I wanted to make like cut it on the bias, I can do that as well. The ribbon actually will stabilize the edge, so whichever grain you choose to cut the fashion fabric on is all good.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, well, we'll continue. Then our next step is going to be, see, ultimately, we're going to press both of these sides up over the ribbon. But instead of bringing this up like so, it's far easier when you're pressing. You're going to use the ribbon. You're going to fold it on the ribbon and push slightly.
by doing that, you wrap the fabric securely over the edge of the ribbon. You're not folding it on the stitching line. You just want the fabric to crease up and over the edge of the ribbon. Let me show you the result here. That is this side. So we folded up and over the ribbon, but you notice we didn't fold the ribbon. Important. Now, our next step will be back at the machine, where we will machine base through all the layers midway between these two rows of stitching. So you want to sew with a long machine base, 5.0 stitch. This goes midway between these two rows of stitching. Now, if it isn't dead in the middle all the way perfectly, that's not good. You just want to sew it as accurately as you can. Let me show you the results. That's what it will look like from this side. That's what it will look like from this side. Next, trimming. So here we are. I've flipped it over. So when you're trimming, a little tip for trimming, slide the blade along this way. Have the raw edges facing your palm and slide the blade this way. It goes very quickly. What you'll see is that you can get fairly close. So you're going to trim all of this seam allowance off. Almost done. Okay. So we have, and it's a little raggy there, don't sweat. That's in the seam allowance. You'll never see that in the finished piece. So we are halfway there. Back to the pressing table. Again, we press from the back, and again, we want to press over like so. So we have this. We'll go back to the machine. Sew one more time down that row of stitching. And as we sewed last time, same 5.0 stitch length. Once we have that, turn this a little bit this way. Here we are. And that is what it looks like. And again, we will trim this side as well, close to the stitching. Once we have this trimmed, I'll give it one more press and meet you back at the work table. There you are. I will press, and as I said, meet you back at the work table. This is the result.
So any questions up to this point? Have you all glazed over?
No, it's interesting.
Okay, good. Yeah, so yeah, like I said, don't be shy. If you have questions, let me know.
So now we have what I call the welt unit. Because where we're going with this is we have two folded edges, and then ultimately we will split this down the middle, but not yet. Having both welts sewn as one unit makes everything easier to manage. And also, just as a memory aid, if you see these 3 rows of stitching, that's the wrong side. But I'm not going to say wrong side, right side. I'm going to say 3 rows of stitching, 1 row of stitching. So you can tell the two apart. Now that we have the welt unit, we can start the buttonhole. Make sure you have about 1 inch on either end. It's just easier. You can always trim it off later if you don't need it. These marks should be perpendicular to the folded edges. Now again, let me just cut this off and point it out. Notice you mark it on the side that has the 3 rows of stitching. This is the face of the fabric. This is what you'll see facing up when you put them together. And that's how you determine the length. From here, we want to mark the stitching line. So I can put this aside. So I will mark this one first. Now what you're looking at, you want the edge to be, see there's 1/4 of an inch, there's 3/8 of an inch. You want the fold to be ever so slightly past the 1/4 of an inch mark on your ruler. Over here. Go better. Ah, yes. Okay. So I'm going to zoom in here, move this over a little. So you can see it's just a hair past that 1/4 of an inch. Now this is the rule. It's better to have it too close to the middle than too close to the edge, because this is going to be the width of our welt. And if you have it too close to the edge, you're going to get a gap between the 2 welts when they're finished. Now, for positioning, these 2 intersection points here represent the intersection of the cross marks and this row of stitching down the middle of the welt unit. So when you're placing it, you can check placement by seeing where that stitch is. And I'm going to pin. You could pin or you could just thread based. Doesn't matter. So we pin this in place. Next.
So Kenneth,
Yes.
when you marked this, in the initial marking on the front, was that started as a tailor's tack and then you drew it out, or?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
And so, you know, this line here and this line here, that is the same length as the 2 vertical marks on the body fabric. So, you know, both are the same length. Okay. Okay.
So now we're going to put the needle down right there. And so I'm going to put the needle in. Here we are, right there. And then you can lower foot, take out one of the pins. Now the stitch length here is 0.75. Short stitch. This is a buttonhole. You're going to be opening and putting buttons through it. You want it to be strong. And so now we're going to sew. Here, this is, notice I haven't trimmed this end here. You don't want to trim this end. What you want to do is you want to pull this across to make sure that you know exactly where to put your needle in. You have that in. Then, again, and then here, bring this across. So you want to make sure these rows of stitches end in the same place. Now, if you have to raise up the presser foot, there we are, a time or two to make sure that that's all good.
Kenneth, it's
Oh.
Julie. I have a question. Are you sewing the welt unit onto the right side or the wrong side of the
The
fabric?
right side, right side of the fabric. And then on the welt unit, I like to, it's like the 3 rows you'll see, because what you're doing, you're sewing the two face to face. But I get a little dyslexic, and so that's why I say have the 3 rows of stitching face up, because otherwise I would get them confused.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
There is the result. Now, back to the work table to open this up. You can see I've trimmed all the threads here. So what I want to do first is we use the good scissors, and we're going to open this up. We're going to split this in half. We don't want to cut through the ground fabric. We just want to cut the welt unit in half. As you can see now, we have 2 different welts. Now let's turn this over. Now you can see here that both of these rows of stitches end in the same place. They should be the same length. If not, you can pick 2 or 3 stitches out to make sure that they do end up the same place. Now what we will be doing, doesn't hurt to draw it just because then you have the reference. We're going to be cutting from here to there, to there, to here, to here. And then we'll turn everything right side out. But what I want to do is take this over to the pressing table and cut it and press it there. So the clipping goes.
I'm going to stop for a moment here. What I have found, if I'm doing a whole row of these, like for the front of the coat, I would sew them all in place first. And then I would cut the welt unit in half. But then each one of these I will open and turn and press and finish separately. So you can do the, you can get them all the welt units laid down on the front at once. You can cut down the center of the welt units all at once. But then when you're opening and turning each buttonhole, I like to do each one separately. I find it minimizes any kind of distortion you might introduce by taking it from the pressing table to the sewing machine.
like so.
Kenneth, I've got,
Mark this.
Yeah, go ahead.
it's Janet. I may have had a sound issue. How long is the piece of welt unit? It's obviously longer than the buttonhole you're
Yes.
doing. How much do you extend beyond?
Well, generally I just make a big old long piece, but I like at least an inch on either end. You can always trim it down later. It's much easier to turn everything right side out, press it, sew the ends down with a longer tail on each end. So the minimum would be an inch.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So other questions? Don't be shy. Okay. So we will open this up now.
And you're going to clip just the ground fabric right to the end. And do this with all four. This is all very, very ticklish and careful. Now, the problem that some people create is they don't cut right to the end of the stitching. They stop about 1 millimeter before. That just makes a pucker. So you've used very short stitches for this. So it should hold true. Now we want to turn everything right side out. So I'm going to turn this over, and this is how I remember it. If you use this method, your seam allowances, the little triangles on the end, will end up where you want them. So we're going to put the folded edges together, and you're going to feed the raw cut edges through the opening. And if you feed them through the opening, it's going to start looking like a bound buttonhole, because that little triangle is going to line up where you want it to. You want that to be there. And so let's do that on this side here again. Line up the folded edges, feed this through to the back. And so far, not bad. So now what I like to do, I'll go in and trim that out later, is to press this on the seam roll. Turn this over. And see, when you turn this over, one thing you can do is you can look and make sure that both of those cross marks match. Because if they match, you're all good. That means that you won't skew the rectangle. And you can come in here with thread and just base these closed. This will just make your life easier. You'll take this out later, so use a contrasting thread. So here we have this stitch closed now. And we can come in, and like I said, I like pressing over the seam roll so that we don't emboss the seam allowances into the surrounding fabric. So here it's pressed. So now let's have a look here. Beautiful. So I can take that out later. So our next step is going to be at the sewing machine. Our next step is to sew the little triangles down. Now, this turned out pretty well. Sometimes you get an overlap of the two welts. And so you notice here, let's look at this foot. This is the zipper foot. You could use any zipper foot. I like the adjustable zipper foot. We're going to sew the little triangles at the ends down. So We fold this back. There we are. And we're going to sew right across there. So we bring this under the foot. It's good to keep the threads out of the way. Zoom in a little bit here. So the object here is to get right up next to that fold. And you're going to sew this with a 0.5 stitch. So before you sew, I like to put one finger here. You can pull one down, pull one up, and then put this right next to the fold. And then you're going to sew like so. So again, there you have the stitch, and there you have the bound buttonhole. Now, what I will do, I turn this over, you can trim these threads away. And you can also trim these ends to about 1/4 of an inch. You don't have to have a lot hanging out in the final garment, but you do want to remove this like so. Having the long ends, it just makes everything easier to manipulate as you're sewing. There you have a bound buttonhole. Now, finishing the button.
So I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions. Okay then, so now we're going to talk about finishing the facing, the other side of the buttonhole.
What I've done here is I've sewn a mock facing for this buttonhole because the object here, when you make a bound buttonhole, is that you actually want it to work. Now, in the old days, what they would do is they would just cut a slash and whip stitch the facing to the back of the buttonhole. It never worked. It never looked good. So I'm going to show you how I like to do it because I think it gives a better finish. So to begin, after you have the facing on, don't try to just finish the openings and then put the facing on. You want the facing sewn in place before you even try this. And if you need to, you can baste all of this down to make sure you know where your placement is. Then turn this over. And there's the buttonhole. Where the buttonhole is, we're going to place a silk organza. You could use polyester organza if you wish. I like silk better. It presses better. Or you could use cotton organdy, something thin. Operative word, thin. Our next step then is to turn this back over. We want to put one pin there and one pin here. Now, another way you could do this is you could put 4 pins there and make a square opening. I like an oval opening. So you want to know the beginning and the end of that opening. Turn this back over. Dot there. Dot there. So So those are the 2 marks that we need to hit. Now, eighth of an inch below, eighth of an inch above. So you have these 2 parallel lines, and then you want to make an oval as even as you can, obviously. Like so. And actually should be right about there. Here, it's good to come back in here, unpin this. That's done its job. Make sure the organza is pinned securely. We're ready for the next step, which will be at the sewing machine. So here we have
And if I have a question,
Yes,
the
ma'am.
silk organza.
I said, when you drew the 2 lines,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
how far were they from where the pin is? Did you say 1/8 of an inch?
It's about 1/8 of an inch below and 1/8 of an inch above. This one's a little bit
Okay.
off center, but the distance between the 2 lines in this particular example is 1/4 of an inch.
Gotcha. Okay.
Now we're going to open out.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Kenneth.
go ahead. Go ahead.
That's on the right side of the facing,
That's
correct?
it. Right side of the fabric. That's correct. Because what we're doing is we're making a little tiny faced opening. So
Okay.
ultimately, the organza will turn to the wrong side of the fabric.
I get it. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Flat. Because we're going to use what's called a free motion stitch. We drop the feed, we put on a darning foot, and there we are. There, that goes right there. Down. This is hand guided. The machine is not feeding. You feed it with your fingers. So you can move it slowly. Moving it slowly. You make an extremely short stitch. So what we're creating here, when this is all said and done, is a faced opening with sort of a long opening.
So to reiterate that, if you move it very, very slowly, you're going to get a short stitch. And as you notice, I like to start it in the middle as opposed to starting it at an end. I find it's much easier to have the join between the beginning and the end of the row of stitching in the middle as opposed to one of the ends.
Something to know. Threads, and then I'll talk about this. It works better to start in the middle and work all the way around rather than trying to start at one of the ends. From here, we'll go to the pressing table. Our first step here is to press. And here, we want to open this up. Flip it to the stitches. One little clip there, and one here. And like I said, you could make this a rectangle the shape of the welt if you wished. That would make it appear to be double-sided. But if you plan on keeping the jacket closed, this works just fine. Okay, so we have it open, we have it clipped. The next step is turning the organza to the inside. You see where this is going? If you color match the organza, you'll never see it. And finally, you press. And when you press, ideally you want to pull it so that the face fabric favors in slightly. And finally, where this is going, you can bring this on top and hand stitch it closed to finish. So I will do that off camera and bring it back to the work table to show you the result. You can see I'm sewing this with a tiny little slip stitch. And I'm catching the wool itself, not the organza, because you want the organza to roll into the inside. And then just catch some at the end here. We are almost done. So let me secure this. And I'll trim the thread. And we will revel in the beauty of this buttonhole. There. So that is what it looks like on the inside. That is what it looks like on the outside, ready to accept a button. And there we have it. We have a double welt pocket, and we have a bound buttonhole with the inside finished. Ta-da!
Yeah, I know. Ta-da. It's like a party trick. So, questions? Now, I don't expect you to do bound buttonholes, but I wanted to give that option. And so, giving that option means that, I should show you how to do it. So, so questions.
So Kenneth, if you do choose bound buttonholes, is there a buttonhole on the cuff latch?
That's tricky if you're making the bound buttonhole on the cuff latch. If I were going to do a bound buttonhole, I would make the cuff latch wider.
Okay.
To accept the buttonhole.
Or we could cheat and put a snap there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can, wait, you can cheat?
Yes, you can cheat. There's always a cheat.
Oh, because no, it's not a cheat. It's called a design choice.
Sorry, my daughter asked me, "You're cheating?" I'm like, well, not like that.
No. Yeah, see, this is a conversation. I have a little video for it with my students. The frock coat I did with the boiled wool. There was a whole. I put the facing on, and the embellishment hung out about 1.25 inches from the facing, and it was a case of. It was right in front of me in the pattern. If I had been paying attention instead of being so distracted by this pretty embellishment, I would have made the facing just that much wider to cover it, but I didn't. And so there was that part of me going, ah! And so I just decided we're just going to make this a lesson. And so I showed, okay, this is what I did. This is how I got myself out of it. And it was, it was kind of instructive for these kids, because one of them said, "Oh my God, Professor, you've done this for so many years and you still make those mistakes." I said, "Yes, we all do." So it's not cheating. It's just, I said, I said, if you're going to do something like that, you want to make it look intentional. You want to make it look like you designed it that way. Don't make it look, I mean, I could have just slapped on some wool but as it turned out, I had a set of cuffs that I didn't like the motif on. So I used that on the inside. So it looked like I did embellishment on the inside, but really it was a save.
So maybe whiten the latch, and then how would you handle the facing then with the lining? Do you make it in the fashion fabric, then make the lining, and like the
Well-
buttonhole goes in before you do the lining part?
Well, for a cuff latch, this is where you could cheat a little bit. What you could do, because see, I would hand stitch the lining onto the cuff latch in that case. So what you could even do, you could either sew the window, or you could even work a machine buttonhole and sew it on behind. Because really, I mean, it just depends on how deep in the weeds you want to go on that. So that is because there are people who would look at that. I would be one of them, but you just don't let them see it. There are certain things that you just like, you don't let them look too closely if you don't want them to know that. So, and see, this is something that having worked,
I love that so much.
well, having worked in window display. See, my dear friend and colleague Susan Calgi and I, we all know she worked at a couture house. She knows the absolute correct way of doing it. I came up from window display, and window display, you have to get it done by 5 o'clock. And so there are a lot of things I learned. The important thing I learned in window display was don't put your time where it doesn't show. So there are certain things, there's certain ways I do things because you're never going to see it. And so that would fall into that category is, okay, is someone going to look at that or are they not? And so in that case, the hand stitching of the lining onto the cuff latch cancels out using a worked buttonhole. So that's the equation if you need some mathematics behind it. Okay.
Kenneth, I have a question. This is Erin. I was wondering, so I kind of am getting from the way this is done that you go straight from muslin to put the buttonholes in. So you never baste the entire garment together in the fashion fabric before you put buttonholes in it. Is that?
That's kind of how I want to make sure everything's kind of worked out in the muslin. Now, and see, this is where Susan and I differ. She would have all the stitching lines basted. She'd have everything basted. She basted it all together. She'd try it on the customer. I don't do it that way. I want it all worked out in the muslin. And, I might actually, if it were something like I really thought there was going to be some sort of a problem, I might baste it together and put it on the client. But my clients tend not to want to come for a lot of fittings. So, there are different ways of doing this. There's, there are things like, she uses white thread to baste everything. Great. If I'm going to baste it all together, what I do is I use, and so, if you need to mark everything in white thread, all good. But what I have in those situations where because I've made a couple of Chanel jackets, she would probably cringe if she saw them, but they look okay. What I do is I will chalk mark the stitching lines and then take the white basting thread out and put them together and baste with what's in the machine. So that if you take the basting thread out and you don't get it all out, it's not a catastrophe. So, there are different ways of getting there. And, what I do love and adore about Susan is I know exactly, like, okay, if I want to know the exact proper way of doing it, all good. But you got to make money off of this too. And so, like my tailoring, the new school tailoring that's my tailored jacket CD, PDF. That was because I had to look at the techniques and ask myself, okay, what were we trying to do here? What was the aim of a particular thing? And okay, understanding the aim of that particular thing, how can I do this more efficiently so that I don't spend like a month making a jacket? So, there are different ways of looking at it. And when people, because see, I ran into this at FIT. There was this professor who invented the couture program. He was not a nice man. That's all. That's the nicest thing I can say about him. And he said, and there are people who like to put these fences up and say, this is the only way it can be done. And what I say to my students is, if they say, never do it this way or always do it that way, or this is the only way it can be done, that tells you that's the only way that particular person knows how to do it. Having come from window display, and I've made a broad range of things, like clothes that have to get on a runway in an hour are finished differently from the 5 bridesmaids dresses in 7 hours, which are finished differently from the little spandex tap dancing costumes. Yes, I've done all of these, to the couture pieces that live in a museum collection after 25 years. There's a whole range of ways of doing things. And so when you're working on a project, you have to look at, okay, how long do I want to, how much time do I have? How much money are they going to spend? How long does this garment have to last? It's a whole continuum. And so, it's good to know the absolute positively correct ways of doing it. My methods may be a little unorthodox, but, they seem to work, and I turn out clothes that look pretty darn good. Very long answer, but there you have it. Okay, so what are the questions? Now, don't be shy. Okay, so I guess we're kind of coming to the end of the class. Maureen, yes. Yeah, you want to turn on your mic. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So the alternative to bound buttonholes is machine buttonholes.
Yes, and that's
Okay.
what I'm going to be doing on this coat, because I just, she's getting it for free. So we're using. I'm sorry, but not that I begrudge her, because she was kind enough to give me her measurements, and she was kind enough to stand for the fittings, and she's going to get a nice coat. But and so if you're in the New York area, what I do is I go to Jonathan's embroidery to have the buttonholes worked. I'm not doing handwork buttonholes. If you want to do handwork buttonholes, knock yourself out. I can do them. I would rather chew glass. Yeah, I'm just being honest. There are things I can do them. I can make a good job of it, but it takes me forever. And to take them to Jonathan's and they turn out perfect every time, and they're $1 a buttonhole, that's what I choose to do. Yeah.
So if you did that, you would do the buttonholes then at the end of the project?
That's correct. Yes.
Last.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like it's a little bit different, sort of like when you're planning your project, and this is something I talk to my students at FIT about, is like, you have to think through the whole project, because I've had students like right at the end say, oh, I want to do bound buttonholes. Like, I should have thought of that at the beginning. Now it's going to be work buttonholes. So yeah. So the machine buttonholes happened at the end.
Okay.
Okay. So other questions? Okay, well, I guess then we are finished for today. So
I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
What is your policy about emailing you questions?
Don't email me questions. Don't be shy. Yeah,
Email, okay. Because I find often as I'm going through something, then, I have a question and I'm not sure. So I didn't know what your policy is.
I would rather you ask the question than be hung up for a week.
Okay.
Okay. And that applies to everyone, just, because, I have random people just send me questions from the internet, and I don't care, it's no skin off my nose. Although what really irks me, and when I get this, I just don't answer. It'll be, send me your information on X. Dear Mr. King, I followed you for years. Do you, can I ask? No, it's just like, send it to me. I'm like, no. So I just act like I didn't get that email. It's just, there's certain emails. See, that's one thing I do love about email, is you can pretend you didn't get it. Like years ago, because see, when I was single, all my friends tried to set me up with people, and you find out what your friends really think of you by the people they set you up with. And this friend of mine, you're laughing because it's true. This friend of mine sent me this photo some photos of this guy. Oh, he's got a really great personality, which means the same thing in the gay community as it does in the straight community. And this guy, I saw these photos and it was like, oh, this is so wrong. He had a teddy bear. And I'm good if you like teddy bears. I'm not someone who wants a guy that likes teddy bears. It's not my kind of guy. I mean, it was just like the whole thing was just wrong. And I just decided I'm just going to act like I didn't get that email. And then she did ask me if I got the email, which I think she understood that I was pretending that I didn't get it. And so she just pretended that she didn't send it because it was like, no, that's no. So anyway, so yeah. Okay, so other questions?
Actually, I have one more.
Yes, ma'am.
I discovered, I sent my fabric to the cleaners to be pressed, steamed.
Mm-hmm.
And now it looks like it will fray.
Okay.
So do I need to fuse it or?
It would make it easier. And since you're kind of in the area, it would make it easier to have it block fused, because having it block fused is going to make the seam allowances kind of stay intact.
Okay.
I'm told, there's the place that I use is called MK Cutting, but also International Pleating, I'm told, has just, I think Laura or Lisa, you told me that International Pleating.
Yeah, they announced it this week on their Instagram account. They mentioned it. Like, for all I know, they've been doing it for years, but they mentioned it specifically this week.
Yeah.
They're doing
So
are,
those
are they in New York? Are they in the city?
They're in New York.
Okay.
Those are two places that if you're so inclined to have something block fused.
Okay.
I think International Pleating would probably be more able to do mail-in orders, whereas MK Cutting, it's like a Garmento place, and you just show up with your fabric. But if you're not here in New York, it might be a little difficult to have them send it back and forth to you. I don't think.
Yeah, I found International Pleating to be very responsive to emails.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, they do good work. I've had pleating done there, and so it's good to know this too as a resource for people who are not in New York. Yeah, they do great work.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So if no other questions, class is dismissed. I'm going to hang around for just a few more minutes, and so yeah, I hope you all.
I have a question, Kenneth. What do you want us to have done by next week?
Well, I would like the coats to be fitted, and I think it couldn't hurt to kind of keep up with me on the what we're doing. So if you had the cuff latches done next week, everything fitted and all of that, you'd be good.
Okay.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
I don't need to measure to mark the welt length. It's already marked on the garment. Yeah, you're right, Erin. Yes. Okay.
All right.
Take
Very
care.
good.
Thank you, and have a good weekend.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Bye now.
Thank you.